What's up, everyone? You're listening to the Noizze podcast, sponsored by Stereo Brain Records and brought to you on the Noizze Podcast Network. Today, it's a little bit different. I take up hosting duties and chat to fellow Noizze and good friend Elliot Grimmie about the new Kid Kapichi record. It's an absolute blinder when it drops this Friday, the 23rd of September. Do check it out if you're in any way pissed off, pumped up, and ready to rebel against anything going on in the UK right now. Consider this the soundtrack to said rebellion. Make sure to follow us on socials. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter. You can find the website at Noizze UK. You can find the podcast at Noizze Podcast Network. We're always dropping stuff onto our Instagram. Make sure to drop us a like, subscribe, review. We're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you might like to listen or watch your podcasts. So please do also go and find us on those platforms. Any kind of like, share, review, subscribe, whatever it is, or even a comment. It goes a long, long way. So we appreciate all of you that do that. Enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to the Noizze podcast, sponsored by Stereo Brain Records and brought to you as part of the Noizze Podcast Network. This week, you'll see two very different faces. We're giving Kris and Sam a bit of a break this week, so you're stuck with myself. I'm neither cynical nor your boy / your host. And for his debut, an individual of many hats, a little background on him as well. I say hats, you wouldn't want to put hats on with his incredible hair. He's a band's wet dream, a band's biggest fan, the stan, if you will. He cares for the music scene more than many. You'll find him queued up at a show to get to the front. Even if it's a pub show, you'll probably find him outside. For some reason, you'll find him in, or for the same reason even, you'll find him in all of the festival pictures right at the front. He's the only journalist I know that refuses guest list to ensure a place at a show. He's always the first to grab merch and a vinyl. He's our resident hot taker, but we're not going to bring Metallica into this. But he's guaranteed to throw out some ludicrously outrageous opinions. He's kind of that guy in Noizze, but we love him all the same. It's Noizze Podcast Virgin and fellow Noizze. Felt weird to say Virgin there. Elliot Grimmie. Hello, mate.
Hello.
How are you?
Hello. Yeah, I'm I'm good. That was a hell of an introduction.
I was about to say,
that.
how'd you like that?
That was amazing. I might just use that on all. If I ever look for like any other jobs, I'm not gonna use a CV. I'm just gonna send that sound clip.
I thought, you know what? How can I, let's make the most of this opportunity. And I've bullet pointed a couple of things that I always think about you, and then
amazing.
Just work with that. Anyway, how are you? How's things?
Yes, pretty good. I have I don't know, really, just been working and going to a lot of gigs as usual. Like, if I'm not at work, I'm at a gig. If I'm not at a gig, I'm probably at work. It's like it's life.
So the monotonous cycle continues. I think there's it's probably a good segue into the bands that we're talking about, and
yes,
a band that are not afraid to call out the working pattern and living for the weekend, as I'm sure we'll get to on some of the songs later on. So like I said, Kris and Sam are going to be back next week talking about Slipknot, which is a bonkers thing to say out loud. Albeit, let's hold our opinions don't matter so much. So whatever we think on the Slipknot record, that's not going to make it. And we can leave that to them to sort out anyway. But and after the divisiveness of Parkway Drive, it's probably for the best anyway. Although a round table event of what we all thought of that in the Noizze group would have been quite fun.
Anyway, yeah, that would have been interesting.
It really would have been. We are here this week to talk about Hastings Power Punk 4-piece. I hope I say this right because we pre-discussed this, but it's Kid Kapichi. So I want
positive.
Sure. It's Kapichi. You've assured me as such because that's what I first said, and then I doubted myself, thinking, "What if it's Kapichi?" And I've had interviews in the past where I've gone out on a limb and said something, and then it just butchered it. So hopefully that's right, but you can call me out if not. They're set to drop when this releases. It'll be the Tuesday before it's released, but it's released on Friday, the 23rd of September. It's their second album. Here's What You Could Have Won, via Spine Farm Records. It's said to boast the band's bigger, punchier beat punk sound, which they've called it. Co-produced with Dom Crake from Nothing But Thieves. It's the band's second album since their 2020 debut, which they've since re-released as a deluxe version. And from what kind of threw them onto the scene, despite them being around for quite some time. Before I dive into the record and what our general thoughts are, what's your this album relationship with Kid Kapichi? You know, are you already a fan? Are you a new fan? What's that look like?
So I was sort of vaguely aware of them. I remember there being quite a lot of hype about the first record without, like, you know, when you hear things, you see a band's name pop up in loads of places on festival bills, all that kind of thing, but you haven't quite gotten around to checking it out yourself yet. And I remember I remember making a point of like saving the first record, like, oh, I'm going to listen to that at some point. And then at some point I did listen to that record, and for whatever reason it didn't really stick with me. I don't know why. And then fast forward to them releasing the latest, not the latest single, the first single off of the new record, New England, with Bob Vylan on it. That track just kind of fell into my lap where I do my little new music playlist. I gave it a listen and I'm like, oh, that's a slapper. And from that moment, I was kind of like, yeah, my interest had peaked. I re-listened to the first record. I enjoyed it a lot more. I started appreciating the themes, listening to the lyrics. Kind of went from there, really. It was a bit of like a slow burn, but yeah, I just, over time, discovered the band, not necessarily through me making a huge effort, but them more just being placed in my lap and me having to go, do you know what? Yeah, no, this shit's good. It's good stuff. Like,
yeah, likewise.
Yeah.
I think, or probably less so from my point of view, because I kind of saw, I do the release schedule for the Noizze podcast and saw what was coming out this week and thought I wanted to dive on something slightly different. And when I saw that, Kris and Sam will put in what they can and can't do and things, and I just jumped on this because it kind of pushes me out of my comfort zone a little bit. I'm not a through and through punk fan whatsoever. I love punk elements in songs, but I've never really been a fan of kind of overly accented, sort of lyricisms and vocals. And, it's niche in a way, isn't it? Because, it's like in some ways, it's like a modern version of Sex Pistols. And it's kind of like you've got all those sorts of vibes and that sort of rebellion and things. And albeit I kind of agree with all those sentiments, punk has never really clicked with me. I'm not an Idols fan. I kind of haven't dived back into sort of, the history of punk, so to speak. So I was kind of a bit nervous going in thinking, if I'm honest, I'm skeptical of whether I'm actually going to like this. So I'd say my relationship with them was kind of far less so. And I'm talking like 2 weeks ago when we kind of penciled this in and said, yeah, let's do it. This will be good fun. So they're regarded as a band that are not afraid to explore and raise issues. And as we'll get into it, they're not afraid to sort of tackle something right on the nose. They've talked about subjects in the past, including racism, in-work poverty, mental health, violence, frustration, and even all-consuming love with honesty and humor. And I think that's a really good summary that I've pulled straight from the press notes there, but it sums it up well. So, I mean, we'll dive in a sort of kind of loosely talk track by track, some of the highlights and things like that as we go along. But general thoughts and a summary for me. What you're thinking of the album? What's your thoughts?
It's very punchy. Generally, like in terms of running through it, listening to it as a full body piece, the album definitely kind of split itself in two a little bit for me. So you've got like the first, I think it was 5 or 6 tracks roughly. They all kind of just tick through. Not that they're bad tracks; they're great tracks, but they all kind of tick through at a similar tempo with you hear it and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's Kid Kapichi. Then when you get into the second half of the record, you notice that they start sort of just dipping into other sounds a little bit. Nothing too straying like too far from what the album has already set up. But like, you've got Party at number 10, which obviously slows the tone right down. It's a lot more satirical. It's almost a bit theatrical, bit camp. But it's also extremely on the nose, with the whole Party at number 10 about effectively Partygate, the criticisms of our MPs and what they were getting up to during a time that they were telling us, yeah, no, you can't meet up with each other, can't be together, but we're going to do it. We're going to do it. Just a little cheeky,
Absolutely,
so with that one, they changed the tone. And there was one, I think it was right near the end of the album. There was a track called, I think it was called Smash the Gaff. And it's got it was a banger, but it's got this big, that intro that came in, I was like, now this sounds like Muse back in their heyday, like a big space rock riff that I wasn't expecting from one of these kind of post-punk records, especially given the sounds that you heard early album. And then suddenly I was being hit with this great big otherworldly sounding, just it was so good. I was immediately on board with that one. So it was nice to see some experimentation in there alongside them, playing to their strengths,
Yeah, I agree. And I haven't got the context for what the first album was like, and I can imagine it's probably what the first half of this album sounds like. I think it's a great observation from you to say that there feels like a genuine split. And I think Party at number 10 feels like the moment that the album kind of goes from there through and through, like you said, comedic, sort of punky vibe to this kind of, like you said, this more atmospheric, this more euphoric sort of sound. They pull in a lot of sort of influence and genre and things like that. And we'll get into that in a minute. But yeah, I mean, I am so pleasantly surprised. I can't believe how much I liked this. I was really taken back about how much track on track, for me, it just built this sort of fandom. And then by the time that, so you do 2 or 3 listens for a pod episode, and yeah, it like by the second time round, I was starting then to enjoy the first tracks a little bit more. It's like you kind of said, it's a little bit of a slow burner, but after a couple of listens now, I am feeling like I want to sort of track back through that back catalogue. I mean, let's get into it. And I mean, the first majority of the first half of the album is already released. So we'll try not to agonize over it. But I think also there's some real points worth mentioning. You mentioned New England. It's the most sort of shamelessly explicit political track with that brilliant feature from Bob Vylan. It's got this sort of obnoxious sort of swagger about it, and, pokes fun at that kind of the current state of affairs in the country, which we won't get into, but I mean, they get it right, don't they? Let's be fair. They kind of remark at how insane we've gone in the UK, and given the week and everything that's going on, I kind of wholeheartedly agree. I love how punk this is. I love how on the nose this is. Bob Vylan goes hard as well, and I haven't dived in on any Bob Vylan back catalogue whatsoever. So
you should
kind of want to do that a little bit. And I know you're a Bob Vylan fan, which is probably that little bit of that tie-in for you. Similarly, I really enjoyed Rob the Supermarket. I actually thought, it was at this point that I was kind of thinking their lyricisms are so clever. The way that they'll put things together. There's a really sad undertone to it. It's funny, but it's. I really felt like the picture that this paints. It comedically depicts someone robbing a supermarket, and it kind of talks about things like the security not being able to catch up with them, even free security guards or whatever it kind of says in there. But there's this sort of poignant desperation of the nation, isn't there? Where it's this kind of, it's really relatable, but not in a way that I've ever robbed a supermarket, in a way that you just hear about it so often, and it's such a kind of standard way of life for the working class. And then the track after that as well, 5 days on, 2 days off, I just thought was brilliant. To talk about the way that you kind of live for the weekend,
Yeah.
touches upon the idea of I really don't give a shit about it, you know, and it can be that sort of mentality in the working class, can't it? Where, you know, it's kind of like, well, what am I'm just doing this job just to get by, to survive. The weekend's the only bit of fun I can kind of have. A brilliant wordplay on it and really striking. Those first three songs, they touch on really poignant parts of the kind of current state of affairs. I mean, is there anything that you wanted to add on any of them, apart from the fact that they all are great?
Well, I think so. Like touching on the whole, the desperation that's kind of there but under the surface. I think it comes across very like, if you don't laugh about it, you'll cry. Kind of attitude. So there's the reason that it's quite bolshy and it's got that swagger is because they're tackling issues that if we were to talk about them normally without that music there to bolster what we're talking about, it would be quite a horrid conversation. It would, it's a sorry state of affairs that we find the UK in, and that's effectively what that's what they're all about. They're writing songs about how they feel as working class individuals themselves, people that have come from those backgrounds. And it says right there in the press release and in interviews that they've had a lot of the stuff that they've been writing about. These are all lived experiences. They're not just pulling this as in like, oh, what's a working class thing? Let's sing about that. No, they're pulling from very real feelings that each of those band members has had. And I think in that is where that instant relation comes to, because that their sound is such a blend of like, punk, post-punk, indie, rock. It's got this, I'm seeing it described as beat punk, which kind of does make sense to me, especially, the early tracks, they're led very heavily by the tempo of the drums. A few of the tracks their intro sounds like, different speeds of just clock ticking, and it leads the track in, and it just builds on that, that kind of rhythm. And then the moment the lyrics come in and you'll go, oh, fuck yeah, that's real. That's hitting, that's hitting somewhere deep and personal. But instead of crying about it, you want to sing along. You want to bust out that bombastic chorus. You want to sing it back at them. And that's, I think, exactly what they're going for. They, in the vein of everyone using their voice to speak up together, that's what the music is quite literally doing. If you've got, 2,000 people in a field and they're on a festival stage and everyone knows the words, what you've got there is not just a gig crowd but a political movement. It's right in front of you.
You're seeing a lot more of it, aren't you? You look at recent performances from the likes of Sam Fender or Enter Shikari, and some of the big slots that they've had recently, and some of the call outs that they'll make from being very genuine people from very genuine working class backgrounds. And they haven't let go of that just because the notability and the fact that they're in this sort of bigger sized act or band. And you're right, that genuine relatability is so important, because the moment that these guys lose this, you lose such an edge for what it is. I mean, the next two tracks are also brilliant. I Envy You, spelled out I Envy You, which halfway through the track I realized was pronounced I Envy You. It's a fun one, I guess. It's got that very sort of it feels very London, doesn't it? It feels very much like it's kind of talking about someone that, oh, am I supposed to envy you? Sure, if it makes you feel better, I'll do that. But everyone over here is kind of just calling you a bit of a prick. And Super Soaker was really good, which was the next track. I felt like there was some real. I felt it was like the first bit of melody that I heard, and I don't mean that as poking a negative at them at all. I think it's impressive to this point where kind of the choruses have relied on sort of this sort of, like you kind of said, that up in arms, people singing along, crowd chant sort of vibe to it. He kind of stretches into a sort of spoken word, to a rap, to a. And there are brilliant senses of melody to it, but this is the first time it feels like he sort of gives you a little bit of his singing voice. And I was like, oh, it's just a small bit in the pre-chorus, and it was like, yeah, I like that. That's I didn't know he could do that. He's a brilliant wordsmith. I mean, both of those songs, the way he talks about kind of, to go back to I Envy You, it's kind of like talks about someone with their was it crocodile skin shoes or whatever it was, and getting out of this posh car and all that sort of thing, and sort of the big eye roll at it, and that comedic value comes in again.
Yeah.
Super Soaker as well is a big bouncy track. And then we get into Party at Number 10. And I know you've touched on this. What a track. I mean, you can't it's bold. It's real bold. I'd be surprised that Bojo doesn't sort of come down and try and put the band off the stage once they start singing this one on tour.
So I find the interesting. Sorry, yeah. The interesting thing with Party at Number 10 is that it was actually a track. You know, it sounds, when you listen to it, it's a very, like I said, you know, it's witty, satirical, but it sounds like an interlude. It doesn't sound like a track you would take seriously, but the band actually did make the decision to release it as a standalone before the album came out. And I think that changed that perception of it, because anyone that was already on board with Kid Kapichi leading up to the album, getting into the album hype, like, yeah, new song, they're going to take that song is now going to be taken seriously. It's not going to be seen as an interlude anymore. You know, I saw them recently at 2000 Trees. They played the song. They had the crowd singing along with them. And the whole, don't look excited, you're not invited. It, to me, was very, you know, trying to make people remember that our MPs, or at least how, you know, we can perceive the behavior of our MPs in this country, is that they're not one of us. Don't get excited, you're not invited, is saying, like, you're not part of the club. They're not serving you. They're not looking out for you. You're not their friend. And having that as such a catchy little jingle, I'm even going to call it, you know, it's got that kind of thing to it.
It's a brilliant point. It's exactly what I said. You know, it's delivered as a sweet acoustic ditty.
Yeah.
Kind of like this if you didn't listen to it in its kind of musical composition, it's a beautiful acoustic track. And you get it with pop songs sometimes. You kind of love, I love that track. It's brilliant. It's kind of, that singer-songwriter, and you're like, oh, you realize he's singing about this thing, and it's like really like sort of, and I'm like, oh no, I just listened to it and wherever the remix version of it when I'm on the EDM night. But it does that so brilliantly, doesn't it? And it sort of does it in a way where this feels so timely. I think often bands can release things with all the best intentions, but they don't quite get it out in time for it still to be in that cultural zeitgeist. And this absolutely is. You know, I think that release as a single is such a good timing for that, because it's only just sort of fallen out of the news, but you know what I mean, sort of the focal point, so to speak.
Something interesting that I actually read, I've read a few interviews with the band and stuff in the interest of getting to know them better, because, you know, I align with them quite politically, is that they, in terms of writing and releasing their records, they try to keep their writing process as close to their recording process as possible, so that those topics that they are singing about are very hot, are very poignant for the time. You know, they don't want to be singing about something that happened 3 years ago. They want to release a song that everyone can go, oh shit, yeah. And then something else that was touched on in one of these interviews that I read by their frontman was that they want these songs, so like especially with Party at Number 10, they want these songs to be something that, let's say, go 3 years down the line, right? The public consciousness is where they're going to forget about the Party at Number 10. But then they listen to that Kid Kapichi, oh, fuck yeah, that happened, didn't it? And it's almost like they're musically keeping a record of the things that we need to keep in our minds when we're working towards, fighting for a better quality of living for all of us. These songs aren't just songs, but they're reminders of the things that we collectively go through. There's a unity and a power within that, because, like I said, you know, these songs are relatable. We go through them together. So when we hear them, it jogs our memory on the things that we sometimes overlook. That life is busy. There is so much going on. There's so much new music to keep track of. But yeah, Kid Kapichi are there at the forefront of it. And, they're getting quite big slots as well. They've supported Liam Gallagher at this point, which is colossal, to get
and
a
it was
platform.
This song, I believe, that put them into his into his gaze, and he complimented them on it, and then they got that out of it, which is amazing because as the album goes on as well, I mean, even the song itself, you can feel that little bit of there's that Oasis sort of vibe to it, isn't there?
Yeah, it's got there was a few tracks on the record that I felt dipped into a bit of a Britpoppy sound. One of the earliest bands I used to listen to was Supergrass, and I remember very distinctly on one of the tracks, and it's bugging me because I can't remember exactly which track it was now. Listening through it and go, oh yeah, it sounds a little bit like Supergrass. That does, So they've got a lot of I'd say classically British elements in their sound. Or at least things that we would, as the public, we would recognize to be British, because they've been sounds that have been laden throughout our culture for years and years,
I think, I think you're absolutely right. And I think despite that, in the same way, making those sorts of comparisons also feels a little bit cheap, because there are those sorts of draws, there are those sorts of influences. It's got bits of Britpop, it's got bits of punk, it's got bits of whatever sort of thrown into one sort of mixing pot, but they do it. It feels that kind of beat punk, post punk sort of. It feels new. It feels fresh. It doesn't feel like it's something recycled.
It's authentic. It feels like them.
Absolutely.
You listen to it and you hear Kid Kapichi. You don't hear 10 different bands. You hear an element of something, but overall, I feel like it's very instantly recognizable as Kid Kapichi. You wouldn't mistake them for another band.
No, I absolutely agree. And in a genre that is largely oversaturated as well, which, can't compliment that enough.
Yeah.
I think it's at this point in the album that it takes that shift that we talked about, that kind of, it moves into this more experimental territory. And for me at this point, this is where a good album became a great album. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There's just the meld of sounds, kind of thinking, oh, this shouldn't work. You had Cops and Robbers, and they've got this real down tuning for the guitars, and there's these slides, and it's heavy, and it's brilliantly done. And to have that break from Party at Number 10, which on the album serves as an interlude, but on its own stands on its own 2 feet, to then shift into this, it was like, oh, here we go. This is really something else. The same with Tar Pit. I thought it was really cool. A huge crescendo at the end of the song.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, but shout out to the drummer. They switch it up. They make it kind of meaty and crunchy when it's that was Tar Pit was one of my favorite songs on the record. It's got this oddly menacing sort of vibe to it, given what they're talking about, kind of this general sort of hysteria and getting wrapped up in things, and in news and in events, and or at least an incorporation of that message. It's really cool. What's your thoughts on Cops and Robbers and Tar Pit?
Cops and Robbers. I made notes for this just to make sure I didn't miss on some of my points I wanted to talk about, and I put in that there was absolutely, it's a sleeper hit. It were one of those songs that wasn't released as a single before the record came out, but when I heard that track, I was like, that could have easily been a leading single for this record. The chorus is huge. Funnily enough, now I now see that is actually the song that I said had elements of the Brit rock in there. It's high energy. I feel like that, alongside with we mentioned before, Smash the Gaff, those two songs, I really hope they start to bring out into their live touring circuit, because those two songs they will go off. Tar Pit caught me off guard because I sort of thought I had the record figured out by the time I got to it. And then Tar Pit was almost sludgy, which, given the name, it fits. So I don't know if it was sort of named after the sound or the lyricism or what, but
you feel it, don't you? It feels visceral. It feels, it's talking about this kind of just wading through treacle that you have to do, and kind of what you're expected to do and mourn about and think about and worry about. And
sludge and doom.
Yeah. And
on a post-punk record, it's mad.
And you're absolutely right. That's a brilliant point, that just when you think you've got it figured out, this record throws something different in. It doesn't sound like it's too far a removal that you're like, what the fuck was that? But it does sound like something that was like, wow, they're really ballooning their sound here. It's brilliant. Never Really Had You then follows.
That one was an interesting one for me, because this is probably, for me personally, the one and only weak point of the album is the whole track. Maybe I need some more time with it for more appreciation, but so that felt like I wanted it to crescendo. I wanted it to explode. It felt like such a great lead in, the soft start, in a similar way to Party at Number 10, but I feel like it just didn't quite hold up to the heights that Party at Number 10 reached. And by the time the song was done, I guess I was kind of expecting, and again, maybe because the album had already thrown me through a few loops, I was expecting, wow, what could they possibly do next? Oh, okay, this song is actually a bit more straightforward in its tone. But it fits with the record. And going back to, they write so closely to when they record. For them to produce an album of this quality, where, again, personally, I could only say it dips once in its entire run through, it's still astronomically impressive,
Yeah, I think if nothing else, I think what's probably, it feels like quite a straight up song. It feels like a bit of is this the ballad on the on the record? So in a way, it kind of, on the one hand, it doesn't feel out of place at all, and it really doesn't.
No.
But on the other hand, because it doesn't hold a really sort of, like we've talked about, a poignant cultural issue in its meaning, it feels a little bit more. I guess it probably holds slightly less depth, but there's some there, and it's kind of a song that's a little bit more open to interpretation. But in terms of vocally and what it proves, it blows how diverse this band can be out of the water, because the fact that they can do that, and I think they very clearly dropped it where they dropped it in the album, because you go into the 2 tracks prior and you're up here. I think if you'd have put Smash the Gaff in behind it, there'd be riots. So I think they just kind of needed to just let's just bring you down for a second, and then and sort of, it's a beautiful song. And it's the one that you could cheaply throw the kind of, Oasis shot in, or the Britpop, Britpunk sort of, comparison to. That's not a bad thing, just because vocally he's got that sort of brilliant croon and range. And from where I was at New England in comparison to this, I was like, I can't,
how did we get here?
Believe that I'm hearing the same band, because they still sound like Kid Kapichi, but. I can't believe that I went in thinking this was going to be 11 tracks of New England, and then I'm here and I got this. I've still got two songs to go. Mental. So, and then we have Smash the Gaff. Elliot, if I was going to sort of join a riot and rebellion, I think I'd be sticking this in my ears. Take part in said rebellion. This is a fucking roarer, isn't it?
It's a rager. To me, I think probably highlight of the record for me, and to leave it so close to the end there as well was like a big last hurrah. Fantastic decision by the band on that part, and it just there's a simplicity in it that makes it so instantaneously easy to appreciate with this one. Again, it's I know the band have got a lot of big choruses on the record, but again, big chorus, easy to sing back, get involved. This is a mosh pit song, it's straight up. It's a mosh song.
It's dirty. It feels dirty from the outset. It's got it is like punk hitting this kind of Prodigy style. You talked about that space punk style.
That bass riff is incredible.
and it's just it kicks in the opener, and I'm like, it has it really sort of sits with you for a while, which I love
Yeah.
because so often, a band will drop you an intro and you're like, fucking here we go, and then the song's completely different, and then after the chorus they give you a token where they drop back into that riff. We're looking at you, new Nickelback. But with this, it becomes the recurring guitar line and riff throughout,
Yeah.
and the way it's just melded together. And then in that like bridge section at the end, there's that tempo change where it like
yeah. That I wasn't expecting either, because again, through all of the how the album had gone so far, even though it had thrown me for a few loops, that's something they hadn't really used yet. So when they busted that out at the end, everything started getting faster. I was like, oh, I'm ready. I'm ready.
Yeah. And then it just there's this sort of stop, bang, straight back into old tempo. I mean, it's clever,
but it still
really
hits
cool.
hard.
It hits hard. It doesn't have like a traditional breakdown or anything like that in it. It is just really dark and
yeah,
from the start to the finish. I absolutely loved it. I think it will be a lot of people's highlight. I think, and I don't see people looking at these couple of new songs like we've talked about, like Cops and Robbers, like Smash the Gaff, and thinking, oh, I don't like this. Because I think you've still got that rebellion, that sort of the same sorts of messages, and unification is still there. I don't think it loses out on that for what it does. Experiment.
I think.
No, go on.
I was gonna say, I think it does. So something else that I'd sort of touched on earlier is how the band, merge all these different sounds together. And something that I notice is that the band are operating on the fringes of both indie and rock. So you get those bands that say, oh yeah, we're too heavy for the indie kids, but we're too indie for the rock kids. Well, Kid Kapichi, in theory, would be operating in that exact space, the kind of spaces that you see like Twin Atlantic and Blood Red Shoes, those kind of bands. But because of the draw of the political side of them, and just how, that unique sound that they've managed to formulate, I feel like people from both sides are involved, rather than it being like, oh, neither are interested. It's the opposite. It's like both are interested. And to get a fairly socially left platform, especially I think in amongst the indie kids nowadays, I think that's impressive in its own right. So that platform they're using is incredibly important. And I think Smash the Gaff is one of those songs that obviously it plays a bit more to the rock side, but it's also going to get the indie, it's going to get them going, and hopefully it's going to sort of bring two worlds together a little bit more, in terms of people appreciating both heavier and softer stuff.
They are a real Enter Shikari of the scene, aren't they, so to speak?
Yeah.
They're moldable, because they draw on so many different factors that make them so relatable. And I remember the first Shikari show I saw was at Download in 2013, and I was staggered by the crowd. The crowd felt different to any other crowd. You just this emergence of loads of kids with those backpack thingies, or those like bum bags that they started to by here. And I was like, what is going on here? It's not just full of rockers here. And massive credit to them for bringing in that diverse crowd. And I think that's exactly what you've got here. You're absolutely right. I think they could they're about to embark on a tour with the Hunter, but you also wouldn't be surprised to see them jump out on a tour with Shikari in the next sort of breath. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Or any. And the thing is the inclusion of that political side to them as well. I could reasonably see them touring alongside, whether it be supporting or whether it be playing above, but that I could see them touring alongside Nova Twins. I could see them touring. I don't know if they have done a show with Biffy. I know Bob Vylan has, but I could see them with Biffy. I could see them with the Gorillaz. I could see them. There are so many different artists that they would manage to just. they wouldn't feel out of place in so many different spaces, and that's impressive. Not many bands can do that.
Some great comparisons there. I think you could even chuck them in with the likes of Sleeps.
Yeah,
it would be a real out there support. But as an opening support, for example, for a band like Sleeps, and I think people would be really drawn in because you'd have the right people there that would want to hear what they have to say, not necessarily because you're expecting a metal band. But then when you go to a metal show or a metalcore show or whatever, you can sometimes get over kind of condensed with all of the neo face. So and they have those punk elements. I get it's we could talk about it all day, but they have really relatable factors, don't they? And we keep coming back to that. Final song on the record, Special.
That
pretty special.
Yeah. Again, another loop that it threw me through, but I think for me it was a very logical the song felt almost, it was somber, and to me it enveloped those feelings of like societal depression. And we have all this anger and we have this frustration in society, but what happens when we get burnt out? We feel shit about it, to be honest. We feel depressed, we feel a bit hopeless, and I feel like that song in its tone sort of embodied that. It had the whole once we're done being angry and those changes that we've been talking about for the last 40, 50 years, before my lifetime, still haven't happened, what happens then? Social depression happens, and it's just as important to talk about that as the more frustrated, more high energy elements that we're seeing. It's great to get out there and protest and get angry and sing along with these words, but it's also we're human beings that have deep sets of emotions, and I feel like that last song tapped into that. Not feeling looked after, not feeling heard, not feeling important anymore. And it even develops into, in terms of genre blending, for me it was very post rock at the end there. It was, it especially the way the song develops through, you get these really nice, intricate, beautiful notes woven into this really sad, crushing song.
I'm absolutely with you. I think it's probably for you, and you can see it just as a listener anyway, that Never Really Had You was kind of, you said it stopped that slightly too soon. And I think this doesn't. It's the longest song on the record. It talks about the way that things don't feel special anymore, the way that we've lost touch with things, that everything's a little bit, it sort of paints this bleak society. And that's kind of what society is. I think you can look into when they wrote this, they must have written it in a lockdown. They talk about shops being closed and the changes that we're seeing in society that have just kind of, if you look back to 2019 or start of 2020 now in comparison to where we are and where we were, we're in such a different world. And it really notes that and talks about the things that we might have lost on the way, but not necessarily have noticed, because things are moving at such a rapid pace and we're still losing and figuring out, and it's all of that. It's brilliantly bleak, I think, and like you've said, it's somber, but in a way it's a perfect closer. And in terms of its composition, it sort of cleverly builds, doesn't it? And there is a bit more of a crescendo to this that sort of, really sort of holds its head above the parapet. It feels like an album closer. It is an album closer. I had to take a sit down after it. I was just feeling, like this record's blown me away. You could have given me a million guesses and I wouldn't have said that some of what I've heard would come out on this. I think in general for me, I'll come to you straight after it, but I was surprised at the dexterity, the diversity showcased on the record. I think it's well paced. I think it's lyrically absolutely brilliant. It's shamelessly British. There's sort of an anti-patriotic call out. If you're worried about them holding any punches on this album as a previous fan, don't worry. I can tell you that for nothing. It's a brilliantly insightful way of looking into the current state of affairs in the UK at the moment. It feels like a modern form of punk. It's brilliantly mixed. It's well produced. It merges styles and genres. I can't talk highly enough about it. I was blown away. Final thoughts, and to answer this question as well, where do they go from here?
Well, I mean, final thoughts would just be effectively. I mean, it's the album that says what we're all thinking. For the most part, anyone that is in the UK that feels the same as these band members, you know, that feels dissatisfied, that feels angry, that feels like we're all of the things they talk about thematically throughout the record. You know, they address a whole slurry of societal issues and the emotions that come with that. It says it all, really, and it's almost like the album could be a companion to accompany you through through this dissatisfaction that we're all kind of feeling and the pressures we're feeling at the moment. In terms of where they go,
than not to have it, right? I mean, you know,
yeah,
because there is that sense of when they bring out some of these really good points. You know, we talk about it, or we might talk about it on social media, but there's some, as with anything that is musical, there's something really unifying about it. A feeling of I'm not alone. This is a generally thought of thing, or a conscious consideration, or has been. And there's unity in that, isn't there? And we keep throwing those words around about unity and bringing together and relatability in it, and they nail it so well, don't they? Yeah, I mean, what do you think then from here? I mean, I'm talking about sort of, I think it's pretty obvious that they'll find the next shitstorm or five to talk about in their next record. But I guess musically, sonically, you know, I see this doing real bits for them. I can see it sort of really throwing them into the stratosphere in terms of their sound and what they can do with it. What do you see that next thing being like? Because they could tread that line on that Dangerous Third album, couldn't they? Where do they tone it down a bit? Do they make it a little bit more accessible? I personally, from hearing this, don't think that's going to happen. I think they can cleverly mold all of them. What are your thoughts on where it goes from here?
I think they will follow. And I know Idols are quite a divisive group, but I think they will follow us. So Idols' third record, they started working with Kenny Beats as their producer, and it brought in a lot of the stuff that Kid Kapichi are kind of already doing. To be fair, like I said, you know, it being very beat driven, and the production sort of ramped up, and they were doing new and interesting things. What Idols did on their first record, and I'm not saying it's a copy, as in just in terms of the point in their career that they started doing that experimentation with sound. Kid Kapichi already there, so the only thing I can see them doing is really messing around with production and maybe probably making something more challenging. Not in terms of lyricism because they're already there, but in terms of sound, I can't see them dumbing down their sound. I can see them actually making it more just wider and wider in scope. In terms of, we've already had a lot of very diverse sounds. Well, there's a whole world of music that they can play with, and they've proven to us that they're very, very capable of dipping into other genres and seamlessly blending different sounds that you wouldn't maybe necessarily expect to hear next to each other on a track. So I think, you know, once they've done their sort of the typical touring schedule that you can expect of bands to do once they put out an album, you know, they want to get out, they want to play it, they want people to hear it. You got all of that side of it. I think we'll probably hear something that's got a few similar notes, but could be quite sonically different, but in a positive way when it comes to them moving forward with their actual sound. I could be wrong. Who knows?
No, I'm with you. I want to see them go fucking mental on the next one. I want to see everything that hit the cutting room floor and is sort of left there in pieces at the moment. Like, oh, they're not ready for that. We are. We're absolutely ready for that now.
Yeah.
Fucking throw everything in the kitchen sink at us. I want to see what batshit stuff you can throw at us. Hold all of that brilliant, clever lyricism. You look at the way that, like we've said about Enter Shikari and the way they've transformed. Do that and experiment and be, you know, I want to, you know, they're exciting, and not many bands, for journalists like us, for people that love music like us, It's once in a blue moon that those sorts of bands happen, and I feel excited by this, and I can't give it a bigger compliment than that. You talked about touring. I mean, they're out on a headline tour in January, and they're also, I mentioned earlier, they're out with the Hunter in October and November. So
they got that big
thinking
Bexhill show it's on the album release day, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, and they do. I think they're doing. Are they doing? Yeah, they're doing some in-store appearances over the next couple of weeks, and then they've got an album release show next Friday on the 23rd of September, which is also going to be a riot. So they've got plenty of opportunities coming up to see them now before they. I think before they elevate and before they hit new levels. I think.
Yeah.
Brilliantly summarized, and thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, actually, mate. To be able
thank you for having me on. It's been fun experience.
Let's do this again soon.
Absolutely.
I very shamelessly did not do the socials at the start, but I'll drop in a little link before that, of course. But we are the Noizze Podcast. You can find us at Noizze Podcast Network on Instagram. You can find us at Noizze Podcast Network on Twitter. You can also find Noizze UK on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and wherever you kind of get your media. In terms of the podcast, you can stream it wherever you like. We're on YouTube, so you can see our pretty faces. Or we're on streaming platforms, and you can catch us on Apple Music, Spotify, wherever you stream your podcasts. Drop us a like, subscribe. Anything means everything. Any sharing, reviewing, subscribing, the whole thing, it does us a world of good. Gives us that extra reach, and it's brilliant. And we just love engagement. It's always brilliant to put something like this out and then to get something back from it. And we want to hear what you think as well. If you've heard us ramble on this long about it, and I think from what I'm gathering that we could have done a podcast that's probably twice as long as this, with how much we've raved about Kid Kapichi. But it's please do. Anything means a lot. And if you're excited for what's coming out soon, we've got reviews coming out from Kris and Sam on Slipknot and Lamb of God, and a whole host of other exciting things planned all the way up until and including the end of the year. But for now, Elliot, this has been a pleasure, and I hope we can do this again very, very soon.